Good evening. Thunder. We've got the real Catskills bowling game going on. I'm thinking of Rip Van Winkle tonight. There's a lot of thunder, a lot of carrying on, very little rain actually, but a lot of thunder. And why not? Tonight, I want to read you a piece by Peter de Vries. Now, he was born in Chicago in 1910 and worked there as an editor of Poetry magazine. He was a regular contributor to the New Yorker in the 1940s and 1950s. His life in suburban Connecticut provided the setting for many of his popular comic novels, including Reuben and The Tunnel of Love. He died in 1993. And this, by Peter de Vries, is entitled The High Ground, or Look, Ma, I'm Explicating. When the helpmate pointed out how I tended to mumble and grunt in confrontation with paintings and other works of art, and suggested I might try framing my reactions in more articulate English, or at least sentences that parsed, I was at first resentful. I remembered T.S. Eliot's remark about how he hated being pressed for opinions when strolling through galleries and museums, preferring to accumulate and discharge them at his leisure, if at all. Yet that position is hardly tenable under circumstances such as formed the occasion for my wife's whispered strictness. The black tie opening of a one-man retrospective that we attended with some newly acquired friends, Bill and Jessie Gamelsch. Such an event is in its nature half social, something one cannot in all conscience negotiate with a mouthful of teeth. So I made an effort to hitch up my responses onto a plane more nearly approximating that of ordered evaluation, with results that surprised, and I must say, delighted me. What we have here seems to me an organic function of form and content, I said, of an oil before which we four collectively stood, shortly after the murmured complaint for which the helpmate had momentarily drawn me out of the Gamelsch's hearing. One in which linear and compositional values are also happily resolved. I like especially the juxtaposition of contrasts, which are at once subtle and intrepid, forthright without being obtrusive. Gilgamesh nodded, tapping against pursed lips a catalogue which he had rolled into a tube. Jessie said, gazing at the picture. I continued. The amalgamation of subject and object, which was but tentatively realized in the artist's earlier period, in such efforts as the blue configuration over there, where an ostensibly abstract intention is still somewhat qualified by representational elements, seem to be somewhatly achieved in this more recent city modality, where the object qua object, the Ding an sich, if you will, disappears in the chromatic boil. Oh, there are the McConkeys, Jessie said, and made for the new arrivals, hastily followed by Bill. The helpmate again waited till they were out of earshot. Then she said, go back to the way you were. This is more easily said than done. When a man has found his tongue on the level I had, the cat is not likely to get it again very soon. I could hardly wait for the next chance to practice my newly discovered gift, which was like a heady wine. It came the very next week, when we attended an all-Chopin concert by a Brazilian pianist, again with the Gamelsch's. Like him, Bill said, in the lobby during the intermission, eyeing me warily as he shook a cigarette from a pack. I think he's good. His reading of the sonata struck me as especially fine. Except in the slow movement, I said, when I detected a certain viscosity in the phrasing. Also, his tempi were at times heretical, to say the least, notably in the more reflective passages, where the lyrical intent of the original was distorted by an overinflation of its rhythmic values, I thought. I find the performance in general somewhat marred by a willful pyrotechnicality, which repeatedly sacrifices the composer's avowed melodic line to a heedless personal panache. Where is everyone going? Bill gesticulated through a doorway to a bar across the street, sucking back a large mouthful of smoke. Time for a quick one before the buzzer. I chased them through a light drizzle, shouting explications lost in the noise of the traffic and in that of the bar, which discouraged all but the small talk into which my three companions seemed, for some reason, eagerly to plunge. I listened with abstractive smiles to their gossip as I mentally drafted amplifications of the points I had raised. I was now beginning to wonder about Eliot. The pleasures of pontification were none he ever passed up in his prose writings. Something or other was causing a steady decline in the Gemelch's state of mind. They were in quite a foul humor when we got to our place for a nightcap after the concert. I noticed them whispering angrily together in a corner of the living room, glancing in my direction and breaking off as I approached with brandies. Evidently a little domestic spat of some sort. It showed me how urgent the need for a bit of stimulating talk. A new novel lying on a coffee table offered just the opportunity. I felt a distinct advance over the author's previous work, I said, particularly compelling in its portrayal of the Slav as counterculture. Here, the grubby romanticism of asphalt vagabondage, long familiar to us in a rash of road fiction from those still into words, is elevated into an outright arrangement of the work ethos as more puritanic dregs. Especially notable are the scenes in which the protagonist takes to the streets and asks non-entities for their autographs as Whitmanesque gestures of democracy. Would, alas, the style were more Whitmanesque. They all watched in hang-dong silence as I packed and lit a pipe. My quarrel is not that it's recycled Faulkner. I mean, what isn't these days? But that rhetoric is, en principe, incongruous with so putatively skeptical a vision. Let me just get the book and read a passage illustrated. No! Both Gemelchis spoke as they rose simultaneously and stood with clenched fists, as though prepared to bar my passage, the book, with physical force if necessary. We have to toddle along, Bill said levelly. We have to get up tomorrow, Jessie explained. The helpmate now climbed to her feet like a third guest. I must see to the door. Until we actually reached it, there was the eeriest sense that she might indeed sail through it and out into the night, remembering only at the last moment that she lived here. Well, you've driven them away, she said, when we were alone. Probably for good. In God's name, can't you stop it, talking like that? It would be dishonest to guarantee anything. Once you've got the hang of something, then I'll guarantee something. That I can't take much more of this phase. Look, we're all going to the Bilkingtons' cocktail party Saturday, and you damn well better talk United States there. It's all I can say, Buster. The helpmate's misgivings were not without foundation. Bo Bilkingham is a retired businessman who encourages canards such as that he carries a hip flask to the opera. When he shakes hands, he will fold his fingers back 2 joints so that you think you are grasping stumps, and say with a laugh, "Lost them on a minesweeper." Saturday evening saw me being greeted again in that vein, and smiling through on my own as I rolled an eye around the apartment to see who was on deck. A large mixture of friends and strangers. Plucking a drink from a passing tray, I made for a group at the far end of the living room who were listening to an LP of some new poet reading his stuff, an album entitled Vries, of which I caught the last 10 minutes. Like it? Jenny Bilkington said when the stereo had clicked off. There were murmurs of approval, a few polite shrugs and exclamations. I could feel the helpmate's eye on me, though from behind. I made an effort to get a grip on myself, the brief foredoomed struggle of a man hooked on exigencies. I cleared my throat as Jenny moved to play the flip side. I find it on the whole creditable of its kind, allowing for the element of naivete in colloquial art generally, I said. The style is basically folk collage, rather than formalized song, of course. The use of slang, cliches, and the like, wedged arbitrarily into what systematic verse there is, offers a literary counterpart of the found objects incorporated into contemporary junk sculpture. Yet another example of the fragmentation that has marked our art for half a century, reflecting a dilapidated Western psyche. Each generation exposes its argot with more bravado than the last. The hippie lexicon is almost all cult verbiage, a development hardly surprising, for in the beginning what may have been the word, but the end is always jargon. How about that? Said Beau. He glanced wretchedly across at another group as he reached for his cocktail. I liked especially the passage beginning, "What availeth it a lawnmower?" as a wry commentator on certain pernickety homeowning elements, comprising, in fact, a culture in mid-slide. Also effective was the symbolism of the carpenter's apprentice who throws down his tools and leaves Scarsdale, an allusion to the current Jesus bag. The plan to hear a little of the flip side was abandoned as the group dispersed, to reform into smaller knots of muttering guests. One especially exercised little cluster, incidentally including Bill Gamesh, was shaking their heads and even their fists. A mob can be an ugly thing. I caught the words, "be allowed out," and other such inflamed scraps. In this way, the party now began to take more discernible shape. The helpmate grasped my hand at one point and towed me across the long living room to a group clear at the other end. "They're discussing movies," she said with a smile intended for public consumption, adding through gritted teeth, "Thank God." That lot were talking about a picture I happen to have seen, and so fortunately was able to join in the conversation. A groan went up from some woman as I approached, probably someone bored with Allherndon's 2 cents about the film, but he was holding forth in typical style on its merits. "One thing is, he's loaded with inherited money, which always sets people's backs up." I stood the flat of a hand against the wall, hearing him out like the rest. "The art that conceals art," I said, the instant Platycill's pause for breath, "is nowhere more important than in the cinema, where we have such a variety of techniques to keep scrupulously in line. I found both the photography and the direction in Buster Scranton obtrusive. The long coal pit and slag heap shots were beautifully realized as anti-scenery, but the close-ups became much too studied, as did the raffishness of the male principal, whose exposition of the role was an uneasy hash of Bogart and Mastroianni, which any director worth his salt could have disciplined. Among the last to arrive We were the first to leave. The helpmate seemed anxious to get me alone in a taxicab. "Well, that tears it," she said as we sped for home. "Did you notice the Herndons and the Gamelchis and the Bustamentis talking about getting theater tickets to something and breaking it off when we came up? We'll never be invited anywhere again, except to a dog fight. I swear I don't know what makes you tick. One moment you're the soul of concession, the next you can't be budged, especially if it involves something that gives you some kind of subcutaneous gratification." "Can I help it if it's my mature period?" "Oh, God, who knows what anybody is like," she said, ignoring me. "Before a woman can begin telling you what a prince you are, you've become a pain. You know what I think? I think," she went on, warming to her subject, "you mask a genuine aggression under a facade of compliance, and vice versa. A sort of basic insecurity inside this husk of independence. You seem unable to divorce your societal from your ego drives. You're gregarious from your competition." She can go on like that for days. Ah, well, it's an age of criticism, isn't it? It's nothing if not that. Peter de Vries, 1971. Back to the title here. The High Ground, or Look Ma, I'm Explicating. Oh, my dear, I hope you've enjoyed it. Now, next week, I want to read you some little gems from a book that was sent to me by a very, very dear friend for my birthday. And it's entitled, Your Guide to Not Getting Murdered in a Quaint English Village. So join me next week and we'll get into it. Thank you, my dears. Thank you for being with me. I hope you have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed reading it to you. So, good night for now. And hopefully I will see you next week.